Beta Upsilon Chi. Bucks presents Man to Men, the premier audio journal for men who live faithfully and lead courageously. I'm Jared Musgrove, and today we welcome back Greg Wilson. He's a licensed professional counselor, author, longtime friend of Man to Men listeners, and he's here for our regular check-in in the ongoing soul care episodes, specifically this series that we've been doing on the seasons of a man's sexuality. Welcome back, Greg. You seem to get all the easy assignments.
Yeah. I'm glad to be back with you, Jared, as always. And yeah, this is, it's in all seriousness, it's a very important conversation, even if it might not be one of the more fun ones to listen to. I don't know. The listeners will have to tell us about that.
Well, I think it's going to be interesting, and one for the ages, if I may, maybe in every aspect.
Right.
Today, we are talking about sex and the middle-aged man. We were talking about this as we were pre-gaming, Greg. What would we define as middle-aged? I know there's different ranges that are given.
Yeah, so some people might say, if you're going to go the broadest, some people might say 40 to 60-ish. I've heard a guy named Daniel Levinson that did some pretty important work on adult male development, called it 40 to 55. So it's right in there. I think I told you in that pregame conversation, around 50-ish, is kind of, I mean, middle age has obviously gone up a bit. What's that?
Yeah, squarely middle when you're in your 50s.
Right. It's the definition of middle age has definitely gone up as the higher end of life expectancy has risen, as there have been, innovations in healthcare that have helped us to live longer and so forth. But, basically it's that season. Let me ask you this question. Here's a trivia question for your listeners. Who coined the term midlife crisis? Do you have any idea, Jared? Putting you on the spot.
I feel like this is information I once possessed, but my middle-aged mind is no longer able to take hold of it.
There you go. What a great answer. So a guy named Elliot Jacques, I think is how you pronounce it. It's a French spelling of Jaques, but I think it is pronounced either Jack or Jock, with the hard J, as opposed to with the soft J. But anyway, I'm getting off track. He was a very well-known, well, actually not so well-known clinical psychologist in the 50s and 60s. But he is known for one thing, and that is that in 1965, he wrote an article that I know all your listeners are going to run out and get a copy of right away, called Death and the Midlife Crisis. And that's the first time that the word midlife crisis was used.
I have so many sociological questions that we don't have time to get into. I'll go check out the article, but you were saying?
Yeah. He was talking about just as a time when, people do kind of confront their mortality and aging and their life choices, and so forth, and called it a crisis because it can create anxiety and depression and even, existential dread, which is again why he was talking about death and people sort of facing their own mortality. That's when we're talking about midlife, that's the season of life that we're talking about. And we're specifically talking about, what's happening with a man sexually during that time.
Yeah, I'd love to start there. We really have already gone there. But I would ask, Greg, just as someone who is seeing, you're seeing, dozens, hundreds of men in your practice over the years in your pastoral ministry. You still serve, quite a bit in your church, in the care department. When you think about the middle-aged man, give us a view for what's happening beneath the surface, just emotionally, spiritually, and sexually. All of that stuff rams together, inside us as men. But what's going on inside the middle-aged man?
Yeah, so, by this time, whether we're talking around 50-ish or 40 to 60 or whatever, around this time, I think most men who are listening would identify, if they've hit this point so far, would identify that they've spent decades in what you might call functional mode, providing, achieving, managing, like getting stuff done, doing the things that our society and our culture expects a man to do. And certainly, well, really, regardless of marriage and family, really regardless of that. Although I was going to say, certainly in the marriage and family context, that expectation is there too. But even outside, even if we're talking about a single man, the experience is still very similar. He has been providing and trying to advance through his career, and so in doing that, in being in functional kind of get it done mode, um, uh, he hasn't he hasn't so much chosen emotional atrophy that may have occurred. It has kind of been formed in him. A lot of times, by midlife, a lot of men, and I'm sure you've seen this pastorally as well, have a real deficit in emotional vocabulary, emotional depth, emotional self awareness. That's not to say that everybody does, but as a generality, emotionally, I think that they're struggling because it's like, who's got time for that? I need to like get stuff done. My job is to get stuff done. So who cares how I'm feeling? I just need to like, you know, get it, keep moving through life. And so a lot of times that's the place where men find themselves um, emotionally. Spiritually, there's a bit of an existential crisis going on, literally, kind of a crisis of meaning. Um, um, the exterior scaffolding that you might have seen um, going up as he's been advancing through his career and through life, in some ways may not feel like it's cutting it anymore. So whether that is career success or whether that is activity in the church, or whether that is family roles, um, so a lot of times it feels like there is a hunger, often unnamed. So a hunger that they can't really put their finger on, um, and and sometimes that gets also misread as a sexual hunger or a sexual need. Although, again, I mean, the culture has plenty of silly examples about like buying new cars and all those kinds of things, which also may be trying to fill a certain kind of hunger. But sometimes it also gets misread as a sexual hunger. Meanwhile, like if they are married or have a partner and have been in a sexual relationship for a while, that person, if they're around the same age, they've also got their own stuff going on too, menopause or whatever it is that's going on. And so they may be also struggling in some ways. And then sexually, the physiological stuff we already know, testosterone starts to decline around the age of 30 to 35. At most people think about 1 to 2% a year. So by the time you're in your mid 40s, testosterone has typically declined by quite a bit. But I'd be I wouldn't want to just characterize the changes as hormonal. There's also a lot going on relationally and psychologically and spiritually that are related to that season um, as well.
Mm. Out of these things, Greg, and this is one reason that I think you're just perfect for our ongoing soul care episodes, is because you are looking at the whole man holistically. We're not just mechanical or sexual beings. We have emotions. We have a thought life. We have
Right.
physical
Right.
bodies. We have a soul that God's given us.
Yeah.
That if we're walking with Christ, we've given to Him. And And I'm just wondering, as men walk into your practice, particularly middle-aged men, are they talking about any of this, or are they hiding it? What are you seeing?
Yeah, generally they're not talking about it. Even if usually when they come into my practice, they come in talking about something else. Maybe they feel dissatisfied with their marriage. Maybe that sometimes there may have been, some kind of an affair or something that's brought them, into my office. So a lot of times it bubbles up. Now, not always. I mean, there are some, and I wanted to say this a minute ago when I made the comment because I always want to avoid stereotypes. I mean, there are plenty of self-aware middle-aged men out there in our churches and in society, and so sometimes at a church like yours and mine, a guy might just, I mean, he might even just come, up to the pastor and say, "Hey, I think I'm really struggling with, my sexuality, in the sense of like, of where I'm at in middle age and like not satisfied, with not satisfied sexually or whatever. I mean, that may come up, but typically they don't talk about. They typically don't talk about the stress. The stress actually might bring it on, so work stress, but a lot of times they don't even talk about that because again, it's this mindset of like I've just got to keep doing things. So a lot of times it will be like some kind of a breakdown. Like wife says you need to come and talk to the counselor about what's
Sure.
going on because something's going on with you. Sometimes the wife may have given some kind of an ultimatum or whatever. But generally speaking, I mean, there's a lot of research out there that men tend to underreport sexual problems. And they also tend to underreport their own stress because, again, I think they have been socialized into thinking, I just need to do whatever I need to do.
No, it's true. This is often a season of peak pressure in a man's life. I was talking with several of my fellow middle-aged friends. You've got a lot going on in your career at this point. You might even making a lot of guys in their 40s, or especially now, starting to think about making a career change or a jump. They're taking on
Yep.
something new.
Yep.
If you have a marriage, you're
Yep.
probably eyeing a couple decades in at this point. Lord willing, your finances, hopefully those are in place, but also the children are getting older and their stuff is getting more expensive. So I mean, just all of that comes on. It's harder to connect with friends sometimes. I talk with a lot of men about the stress of having to make adult friends. It's difficult. So all of that is on you. How does that stress affect a man's, as we're talking right here in this episode, how does it affect a man's sexual desire and connection? And what happens if he doesn't process it?
Yeah. So that's great. That's a great question. So the physiological pathway is actually pretty direct. Chronic stress elevates cortisol, which suppresses testosterone production, and then that puts the damper on libido. So, I mean, it's stress, cortisol, testosterone, libido. Like that's the physiological pathway. The adrenal glands. So there's a fancy name for a couple of glands. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal and the hypothalamic pituitary gonadic or gonads, right? And so if I'm just going to be very direct, the adrenals are fighting the gonads, and the adrenals are going to win because the body always prioritizes stress response over reproductive function. And so physiologically, like there's actually something going on there. Now, you know, um, psychologically, stress also has an effect on focus. We know that. And so when a man is under pressure, Sometimes they'll say things like, I can't really get out of my head during sex. Um, and then that will affect performance anxiety and sexual disconnection. Um, or there's what we sometimes call, uh, colloquially, the ledger problem, meaning men who feel depleted by giving all day at work. So the ledger's really drained all day at work with kids, with pressure, show up at home with little left. And so sometimes sex can feel a little more like a demand than a refuge. Then you've got the men, so who then also there are the men who, because some of our listeners are probably thinking, that's not me, right? They're thinking, I've
Almost
been
certainly.
working. Right. I've been thinking all day long. I've been working. I've been thinking about being home and being intimate with my wife. But then we have to think about the fact that, women also are typically, a lot of times, women are also typically stressed during this season. And most of the time, they need emotional safety and connection before they get to desire. So sometimes, men experience desire as a way of connecting, and women often experience desire as something that they can get to after they're connected. And so sometimes there's a real mismatch there between husband and wife in terms of like how the stress of the day has affected them. One thing that's true typically for almost everybody who's married in midlife is that they just don't have a lot of time for sexual activity and for intimacy and for being with their partner. They're busy. They've got kids. During that season, if you think about your life and most people's lives during that season, their kids are getting older and in a lot of activities. Maybe if they started really young, the kids are out of the house, but typically that certainly wasn't the case for me starting at age 35 in marriage. And I find increasingly in my practice that a lot of people have gotten into marriage a little bit later. And so they're at the place where their kids are super busy. They've been working hard at work. And so then you've got this way that stress affects both husband and wife in very different ways.
I love that you're bringing in the partnership of marriage here, that there are two souls to consider, two changing bodies as well when you're talking about intimacy. This might be the place to go there and just serve some brothers with what's going on in a wife's body at this point. Because again, you mentioned several times that she's also changing. What can we as guys be aware of that is going on in our wives generally around this age as well?
Right. Well, a lot of times she's going through menopause around this time, so that's the change sort of that's happening in her. And that's affecting a lot of the same hormonal systems that in a woman's body that are being affected in a man's body are also being affected by menopause. And if there is a level of if so a lot of times in my office, when I talk about intimacy, I talk about holistically. I basically draw on my whiteboard concentric circles, and the outer circle is what I would call conversational intimacy, and then the next level down is what I would call emotional intimacy. And then the next level in is what I would call spiritual intimacy. And then the innermost level is what I call physical intimacy. And most of the time, what's happening is that men, as a way of getting to connection, as I was saying a minute ago, they will go straight from it can be easier. Again, I know I'm generalizing. Sometimes it can be easier for a man to go from that outer circle straight into the physical intimacy. Whereas for most women, particularly older women, women who have been married for a while, they kind of need to go through those other layers of intimacy before they're ready for the physical. And again, that mismatch creates a lot of issues in
Mm,
marriages of people who are in midlife. So,
yeah.
um, yeah, so they're both going through significant changes physiologically, but they're also going through the stress and the psychological, emotional impacts of just um, being, a middle-aged person in today's world.
Yeah. We mentioned several times, men will often try, uh, all of us, to just take the quickest route many ways. I'm thinking about your concentric circles and many men, feeling a heightened temptation during their middle age. We always hear about, it's like the guy who was married for years and then just all of a sudden, cheated on his wife. That's an old, meme stereotype, but it does happen. And I wonder, Greg, could you address some of that? What's happening to a man who is experiencing heightened temptation, particularly sexually, even though he's in middle age and maybe even just struggling at
Hmm.
home with intimacy with his wife?
Sure. So, um, one of the ways, so again, a minute ago, I was talking about stress and I was talking about how it could reduce libido in the sense of the fact that what I was saying about the adrenal glands and the gonads sort of being pitted against each other, and the adrenals are going to win, and the gonads are the sexual glands, and so, um, but then other men, and then this is where I was saying a minute ago that some of our listeners might be saying, that's not me. So what's the other option? Well,
Yeah.
the other option is that during times of stress, um, the brain's reward system, which is based on dopamine and dopaminergic pathways, um, it becomes more active under stress. And so one of the most potent natural dopamine triggers is sex. And so sometimes when men feel out of control or stressed in all of the other domains of life, they may seek what you could call a predictable um, neurological relief that would come through sexual arousal.
Mm.
Um, in fact, uh, uh, a guy named Patrick Carnes, who's kind of the leading guy out there on sexual addiction, who's been doing research on sexual addiction for years and years and years. He called this the sexual trance, and he defined the sexual trance as a dissociative, regulating experience that temporarily silences pain. And so some men will say, "I need." I need that. I need that sexual experience. I need, and if they don't, this is where sometimes if they don't find it with their spouse, if their spouse is in that category of women that I just said, that she's also like going through a lot and really stressed, and like she just doesn't have desire for sex, which I'm gonna come back to that. But don't let me forget to come back to just in general the
I hear you.
general desire discrepancy between
Yep.
husband and wife in marriage, which happens all across the board. I think you and I have talked about this before, but
We
it wouldn't
have in
hurt to
past
kind of go back
episodes.
to it. But like if she's in that place where she just doesn't have desire, then a lot of times that's where a man will seek it out through pornography or masturbation, or whatever. Like they just need that sexual arousal and that sexual release, or at least they think they do. Like that's what their brain is telling them, is that I really need that. Again, what Carnes called the sexual trance.
Fascinating. Okay, let's return to that desire discrepancy. I want to hear more about that. And dear listener, we are trending toward health here. There is hope for the middle aged man. We're going to get there. I want to talk a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
more.
yeah, for sure.
I want to talk a little more about that desire discrepancy as we start to trend towards some healthy patterns that we can pursue as middle aged men.
Well, men who are listening, let me just, and like I said, I think I've said this on this podcast before, but it bears repeating. Um, men and women just have different desires, and if you weren't taught that growing up, I am sorry. I think I've shared this with you before, Jared. I was a youth pastor in the '90s, and the '90s is when, yeah, we have talked about this because
Oh,
we've
yes, we
talked
have.
about in the conjunction of purity culture and
Yeah.
all that stuff. And so I won't go back into that. You guys can listen to the earlier podcast. But basically, having been a youth pastor during that time period, I just recognized that there were a lot of messages going on in the church in the '90s that were super unhealthy for young men and even young women. But I was in the areas of the church where I was ministering mostly to young men. But were super unhealthy for them to hear. And it was basically like, if you just stay sexually pure until marriage, then you can get whatever you want whenever you want it, which was just terrible
Yeah.
advice. Not even theologically correct, because theologically we know that every human being is broken, and they're broken through all sorts of things that have happened. Maybe that beautiful young lady that you married, that you can't imagine spending the rest of your life with anyone else, but maybe she was sexually abused when she was a child. And so you have a great experience with her in many other areas, but when it comes to sex, she may just be really shut down. Or maybe she's had bad sexual experiences, maybe even in her relationship with you, listener. She has had some difficult experiences that she's still wrestling through. Doesn't mean she doesn't love you. It doesn't mean that she's not wonderful in so many other areas, but it's just important to recognize that not everybody can just turn sex and sexual desire on whenever they want to, and not everybody even wants to do that. And sometimes that is really hard for some people to grasp. Like, why would you not want to do that? And I don't know all the answers philosophically or psychologically, but I do know anecdotally and observationally from my practice
Mm.
that that's true. That your wife, your husband, if you're a woman listening, may not, and in fact, I would even say probably doesn't have the same level of sexual desire that you do, and that's okay. Um, at least it should be okay. But for a lot of men who feel like they're craving this, and like I said earlier, physiologically, it feels like a need. Now, I'm going to argue that I don't think it actually is a need. Biblically and theologically, I don't think it is a need, but it really feels like it's a need. In the same way that, like, I'm diabetic, and I really look like sugars, and when I come out from recording this podcast, if my wife has made some amazing cookies or whatever, I'm really going to feel like I need those cookies. I don't, but it's going to feel a lot like a need physiologically. And so I guess what I'm saying is, it's important to recognize that when you're in any season of life as a man, if you're married, that your spouse probably doesn't have the same level of desire that you do. And then, then you have this kind of almost pursuer withdrawer kind of dynamic. So pursue withdraw. So one person is like saying, "Come on, like, we want to be intimate," and it's God's. Sometimes people even spiritualize it. It's God's desire that we be intimate as husband and wife, and God created sex for us to be intimate. And then the other person's like, "This feels like coercive control to me. I'm not interested in it." You're making me less interested in it by pursuing me in that way. In fact, you and I may have talked about this, Jared, and then I'll let you go to wherever you want to go next in this podcast. I feel like I'm going off on some
This is
tangents
actually what
here,
we
but like,
wanted. What we
I,
wanted to talk about is that desire discrepancy. No, you're right on point.
you and I have probably laughed before, because both of us have been in churches where the language of husbands pursuing their wives is often, used. And I know, look, I'm not, no shade towards my church or towards other people that would say these kinds of things. I know what they mean, but I have said for years, like, I don't think my wife wants me pursuing her in that way, like, for, sex or whatever, like that feels like chasing, it feels like stalking, it feels like, like pressure, or whatever. And so recognize, men, that sometimes even some of the language that we use in the church around pursuing and around leading, while we know what we mean by that, I think those of us in church leadership, we mean taking initiative, we mean loving well, laying our lives down. I get all that. It is not always read or understood that way by the other person. So we need to be
Yeah.
careful even how we think about such things.
Mm. That's good wisdom. What are healthy patterns that you're seeing in marriages at this stage, Greg, when it comes to sex and intimacy?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think um, being honest about where you're at. I think it starts with being able to be honest and being able to be vulnerable. It really
Talking about
starts, let me
talking about
go
being
once
honest with your spouse.
with your spouse and with
Yeah.
yourself.
Mm,
I
mm,
think it
important.
starts, I definitely think it starts with, even before that, though, I think it starts with, if we're talking relationally, I think it starts with an environment of safety. So that's where, like, again, I would sort of jokingly say, I don't necessarily want wives pursue or husbands pursuing their wives in the way that we sometimes talk about in the church, because I feel like that can be misunderstood and it can easily become what I deal with in another area of my practice on a pretty regular basis, which is coercive control. And so I want to make sure that, like, that's not happening at all. So there needs to be safety where if the wife feels like, no, I don't want to do that today, and maybe that's the answer she's been giving for the last 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever consistently, that still needs to be okay. I mean, she doesn't need to feel like she's going to be punished. She doesn't need to feel like she's going to be, um, you know, um, in some ways, that there's going to be some kind of retaliation, or that she's going to create, that he's going to now withdraw because she has said no. Because actually, men, typically what your wife wants when she says, I don't really feel like sex right now, is most of the time she does want, if she feels safe with you, she often does want like some level of intimacy, one of those earlier levels of intimacy that I talked about on my those concentric circles that I was naming for you. So maybe she wants just a good conversation with you. Maybe she wants some just emotional connection time, even if it's just sitting on the couch next to each other and watching a favorite show, or if it's sitting out on the patio and having a glass of iced tea together, or if it's taking a walk and holding hands. She probably wants something. She just doesn't want that. And so I think sometimes it's a matter of like being able to create the kind of relational safety where that is okay for her to want something else besides that, and for the man to not just see, well, if you don't want sex, then that means rejection, because a lot of times for guys, that's what that means, is like, oh, okay, if you keep saying no to sex, then I feel rejected by you, because again, that is, for a lot of men, that is the main way of connection. Whereas for women, it's not typically, it's kind of, for women, it's typically the result of connection as opposed to like the main way of getting to connection. And so you've got to navigate that with your spouse, which means that there needs to be honesty. Going back to what I was saying before, there needs to be honesty with yourself and with the other person. There needs to be a deep relationship with the Lord, a deep abiding relationship with the Lord, in which you know that your real needs are actually the ones that are being met by Him. And that no need that is being met by your wife is being met exclusively by your wife. That is to say, if your wife is meeting this need, the Lord is meeting this need through her. And if she's not able to meet the need that you feel like you have, then the Lord is going to meet that need. And if you're saying in your mind right now, well, the particular need I'm thinking about, I'm pretty sure that the Lord actually isn't going to meet that need, then what I'm saying is, I'm saying I think you are labeling something as a need that actually is not really a need.
That's really good. Thank you for that, Greg. I'd love to wrap up this particular episode, and we'll kind of start getting towards Sex and the Seasoned Man, our next and final episode in this series.
Mm.
But I would love to hear just what is enjoyable about middle age, if you will. And I guess we've got two of us
What?
on here, one at the beginning of it, and one who's well entrenched in it, if I may be so bold.
Yeah.
But then also
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah. Well,
we meet
I
with a
would
lot
say
of really healthy, godly men. So what is great about being middle aged?
I would say I'm past it, to be honest with you. So I'm definitely in that seasoned man category. So I can look on it. I can look back on it and say, I mean, I'll just tell you my experience. Because honestly, a lot of the people that come to me for counseling, like they're not doing well, or they probably wouldn't be coming in for counseling. And so I don't know if I can see them as reliable people to name what's been enjoyable about
I
it
hear you.
for them.
Yeah.
But for me and for friends my age who have, I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed that season. For me, it was a time of a lot of, now, I did make a career pivot during that season. So from ministry into full-time counseling. And so, like you said, that is a thing that a lot of people are doing. And I can honor that. Men, if you're out there and that's your story, it's like, great. I am glad that you have gotten to the end of whatever you were doing and you are thinking about new things that you would like to do. That is an important part of middle age. And I think just framing it as a positive thing instead of as a negative thing can be really helpful. And so, for me, I would say that, my, I was I was on to some new adventures in life is the way that I would probably like to frame that up. I had many great adventures as a 20 something and a 30 something person, but by the time I was a 40 and a 50 something person, I was looking for different things. And for me, part of that was like, how can I really pour into other people? So that's one thing that's important about middle age is that a lot of times, because people have, I can't remember which uh, person theorized this. Might have been Eric Erickson or one of those people that talked about development, but there's this idea of like generativity that's happening in around that time. There's this
Yes.
idea of, like I have um, done a lot of work to get to a place where now hopefully I can like pass on things that I've learned. I can do good if I happen to have made a lot of money, I can, do good in that way. But if I haven't made a lot of money, there's still like there is practical wisdom that I have that I can pass down, whether that's to my kids or whether I can mentor someone else. So I think I think middle age, and I mean, I would say this about the next. So if you ask me the same question in the next podcast, you're probably gonna get the same answer. But like, I think even more so in the season of life that I'm in right now. But even in middle age, I think the idea of like, passing down things that you've learned, being able to think generationally about your life and how your life is going to affect the next generation, and be able to make those pivots if you need to make those pivots. It's okay to do that.
This is good. This is good. Greg, thank you. Oh
But
man.
what
Yeah.
answer would you give to that?
Oh, right on the spot. I mean, I think that I have felt this renewed energy as I've entered my 40s, to be honest with you. I mean, an energy for, yes, I mean, sex is still there. It is still a part of our marriage, and we're enjoying that and all these other experiences together. It's like it's fun to laugh and figure out uh, a now 15-year-old son and one who's about to turn
Hmm.
12. That is a
Yeah.
daily adventure. Um, Talk about a fun adventure. I'm serving as the driver's ed instructor for my oldest right now. that's an adventure. Like,
Right?
I mean,
That
many guys are like, oh yeah,
that
I've been
is
on
an
that one.
adventure.
Yeah, but it's just like, man, here's what's fun. He was great at it yesterday when we went out. I could see the improvement. He's getting more
Good for
confident
him.
as a driver. It's just like, wow, I like driving with you. I can actually glance at my phone a little bit now. Because I know that we're not in immediate danger. You know what you're doing. That stuff's fun. My wife and I just got to take an amazing trip together and just go see some new things together. That's been really, really fun. Because we're kind of at the age now where it's like, okay, we don't have to kind of like follow after toddlers. It's like we
Yeah.
can
Yep.
go out on a date without a babysitter, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really fun
Yeah.
things about middle age. I've kind of like you. I made a slight, maybe career adjustment, I would say. Still kind of got a toe and sometimes a whole foot in pastoral ministry, but
Yeah.
my day job is serving the Men of Bucks, this national fraternity that is like
Yeah.
it's just big and relationally rich and just vast, and there's a lot of depth to it. Just learning new things, that's been a lot of fun. I mean, I could go on and on. Here's a fun one. Reading books that you read before but don't remember, that's pretty fun.
Yes.
That's a new experience for me.
Yes. Yes. Both of us enjoy a good book, and I can say the same thing. I can co-sign on that for sure. It's great when you pull one off the shelf that you haven't read, for a while or whatever, and get back into that. So, listener, like, what I think Jared and I are both saying here, and then Jared, I'll let you land the plane however you want to, but like, the idea of reframing this into as a season of enjoying the things that you have come to you know have through the previous seasons of life. And again, I'm not talking about just material things. I'm talking about, family. I'm talking about just reframing it as enjoyment, because sometimes there is a lot of stress. Undoubtedly. I mean, there's definitely a lot of stress in my life, and I'm in that other season, that season man that we're going to talk about in the next one. And so, like, there's always a lot of stress. There's always a lot going on. But if you can look at what the Lord has done, look at the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living, as a friend of mine likes to say all the time, like that, I think is an important thing to meditate on in this particular season of life.
Fantastic. Well said, my friend. Greg Wilson, you'll be back with us to finish off this particular series, Sex and the Seasoned Man, next time on Man to Men. But for today, thanks for joining us.
I'm excited to join you again.
Man to Men is powered by Beta Upsilon Chi, commonly referred to as Bucks. What if I told you that one of the most spiritually transformative places on a college campus might not be a church program or a campus ministry, but a fraternity? That's Bucks. Everywhere, every day, Bucks men and alumni are raising families, they're leading in organizations, and they're strengthening churches to impact our communities for Christ. You can find out more about us at byx.org. We are produced, rather well, I might add, by the good gentlemen of the Good Podcast Company. For Beta Upsilon Chi, I'm Dr. Jared Musgrove with Man to Men.